Hello, this will be part 3 in this series, and so far the videos are a little bit ad hoc as I'm making them, but we'll be looking again more at this important goddess Seshat. And you can see, well, firstly above her head you see that seven. Now the exact meaning of that emblem, we'll discuss that a little bit more, but her primary role was many-fold. So she was the goddess of writing. She invented writing. Thoth taught it to humanity, but she was the inventor of it. She's the goddess of record keeping and librarians, the goddess of accounting and accountants, maths, geometry, measuring, survey, architecture. She is the female equivalent of Thoth, essentially the goddess of science and knowledge and analytical thinking as well, some would describe, as opposed, so a very practical goddess, very much involved in very practical scientific things, and that's a classic image of her. We'll be looking at that closely, but now I'll be looking at the Temple of Seti I in Abydos around about the 13th century BC. It's in Upper Egypt, and it is in this later period, so it's over 1,000 years away from the Old Kingdom. Temple of Seti, Abydos, that's where the Osirion is, but also where the famous King's List is. And some screenshots, and this video is from Ray Tours Egypt Part 7, Abydos and the Temple of Seti I. Links will be in the description. He's currently in Egypt and he's going all across these wonderful temples and taking longer videos, just really showing them in very nice detail. So if you're interested in Heliopolis, Memphis, Karnak, Luxor and these other places, well, this is from Seti I. And there we have, at the doorway, we have Seshat there. So in her hand, we'll get a better image of it later, but what she's the goddess of writing, the goddess of record keeping, and she's connected to this emblem, the symbol of the writer's tool, which is more of a pictograph in a way, but also a hieroglyph, but that's the tool of the writer. Seshat invented writing, Thoth taught it to humanity. Seshat is special that she's not only shown holding the tools of writing, but she's also depicted actually doing the writing and the record keeping. She assisted the pharaoh in a physical sense, let's say, as where Thoth was more separate, but amongst her many titles, Seshat was the Lady of Letters, the keeper of the mistress of the house of life, or the house of the books. She was literally the goddess of librarians and records, and the houses of life, or the houses of books, were a cross between a library and a school. So she was Egyptian schooling. She was very important in that sense. Also, one of her titles is She of 7 Points. So whether it's a palm frond or whether it was the hemp plant, and both of them have very nice connections. We'll go into them more, but that's one of the easiest ways to firstly recognize her when she is depicted. But there also is for the priest of Seshat will have that pictograph, as well as the more typical hieroglyphs, which are not strict pictographic descriptions. It's a little bit more phonetic anyway, separate topic. So here we also see Seshat stretching the cord. Now there you can see the 7 symbol above her head and the upside down horns. But in what she is doing here is part of what's called the stretching the cord ceremony. We'll get a better picture of it. But when temples were set up, they would have to be aligned. So all the pyramids, for instance, are aligned to the north. So the measurement system, but also the alignment of your temple was the ground plan was the first thing that needed to be done. And it would be Seshat who would assist the pharaoh in this ceremony. Now, of course, there were more priests or priestesses involved in the actual ceremony, the actual process of finding that alignment, but there was this ceremony, this ritual, which the pharaoh at least would be depicted with the goddess Seshat finding the alignment of that temple, and there they are hammering 2 pegs into the ground which would find this alignment. Now the stretching the cord ceremony is also connected to the pole star. We'll get into, because stretching the cord in itself involves on its own, but she's the goddess of surveying. So the temples or the pyramids, the alignment there, very important. She's also the foremost of the builders, both in life and in death. She would build your house in that sense. And there's just like an illustration, but there we can see again a broader picture of stretching the cord ceremony. And this goes from the Old Kingdom. So on the right hand side we can see the oldest pictorial description of a stretching the cord ceremony, right up until the Ptolemaic era and the Temple of Edfu, um, the Greek era when the Greeks ruled over Egypt. But this was a continuum throughout, so that's a very important. It connects geometry, astronomy, surveying, and construction. These very and the sciences, of course, writing and record keeping. These other roles that she has. Now, there we see Thoth, the god of of knowledge, the equivalent of Hermes. You can even Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth are basically interchangeable, but he has the same role. Now, in the later period, he took over this almost completely, but even as we saw in the Ptolemaic era, Seshat was still important in the stretching the cord ceremony. But in the Old Kingdom and pre-dynastic, this references to both Thoth and her are present, but also they're very much stronger. So, yes, Seshat seems to have been written out, but still in the temple of Seti I, Abydos, another depiction of Seshat there. Now the star is slightly removed, but we see her again with this notched rod where she's counting out that she's the accountant. One of her duties was to count out the years of a pharaoh, to record his speeches, to keep his records. But again, we see her always attached with her is that the scribe's tool, like a small inkwell, a reed pen, and either a pot or a small bag to hold the material to make the ink. Very close to it, still in the entrance in the main hall, entrance to Temple of Seti I, there we see another description of Seshat, and again with this notched rod, and again she's holding in her left hand, we see again that same, the scribe's tool. Seshat translates to she who scribes, or the female scribe. And we get it close. So very, very important. So the priests of Seshat, so even in the cemetery next to the pyramids, we see the burials of the high officials. They would have these slab stela, which would list so some would be generals, but one of the highest position, if not the highest position, was the keeper of the king's record. And we see that, I'll get into more of that in future episodes, but yeah, the keeper of the records, the accountant, was right beneath the pharaoh. For instance, Imhotep. Here we see Seshat and Thoth together. She's the female counterpart of Thoth. And if you go back in time, so the Seti, the first here temple, Ramesseum, Karnak, Luxor, they're around about 13 to 1500 BC, but there's plenty of evidence of her, again, in the oldest recorded periods. And so Thoth, god of writing, astronomy, math, geometry, surveying, medicine, botany, it could include alchemy in that, weights and measures, architecture, knowledge and science in general. Seshat was the female counterpart of Thoth. Further inside the temple of Seti I here at Abydos, again now we can see Thoth there, and as we'll pan over again, we'll see another depiction of Seshat once again, and there we can see again she's in the writing. She's holding the writer's tool again in her left hand. Now it's just been inverted, and also the seven-pointed star. But in her right hand, she is like literally writing. She's the goddess of hieroglyphs. So this is from Nature TV, Speakers Corner London. The channel link will be in the description to his video. And now this is a drawing, but this is taken. There are literal carvings of this, and now we'll look at another. This is from Half a Sheep channel. He also visited the temple of Seti I, which is where the Osirion is as well. But he also has another interesting piece of video, and here we see it here. Now again, it must be mentioned in the old text, Nephthys and Seshat are connected, so there can be some confusion between the two. But again, she's holding this rod. We see in her left hand once more she's holding the writer's tool, and in her right hand she's physically writing. There we see the tools of the scribe. And curiously here she holds two rods, and we'll get an idea of that because the Shen ring and the symbol of Hecate is an important one, and we'll break that down a little bit now. Here we see Seshat seated, but we can compare it to this illustration which was taken from a tomb wall or from a temple wall. I'm not exactly sure where, but these other emblems we'll explore, but you can also you already see the trace of the 7 points above her head, the rod that she carries. She's in the act of writing, and again with her left hand she holds the instruments, but with her right hand she writes. And there you can see in her hand with the scribe's tool, the writer's tool, which is an inkwell, a container of ink, but also the reed from which to write. We'll look at it again a little close, but she's also holding two rods here, and that's an interesting point to connect as well, especially with the papyrus versus the lotus and the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. So it's a bit hard to tell, but you can, especially when you get down to the bottom, you can see here that she has two shenrings. There are two rods next to one another, and that figure there is the goddess Heket. But in here, this particular depiction in Abydos, Temple of Seti I, we see two of these half tadpole, half frogs. Usually it's only one, but the importance of two rods is again connected to Thoth, because elsewhere in Temple of Seti I in Abydos we see Thoth feeding the pharaoh the ankh, the life, but he's also holding two rods, and one of them, they're snakes, but one has the crown of Lower Egypt and one has the crown of Upper Egypt. And also elsewhere you'll see, but the lotus represents Upper Egypt and the papyrus Lower Egypt. But what they're depicting there is Heket, this goddess of fertility. For instance, next to the, in inverted commas, air quotes, the light bulb in the Temple of Hathor, she holds knives because she protected pregnant women. Pregnant women would have a blade and they would put a spell on it, and that would protect them from evil. But it can be confusing, but when you see an image of a frog, tadpole turning to a frog, it becomes a little bit more clear that this is actually Heket, this goddess of fertility, also of protection, breathing life into new items, and especially important in Upper Egypt because there is a big distinction. Now, for instance, that's Heket next to the air quotes light bulb, holding the blades, and that's so she can give life. She can take life, but there was this practice where pregnant women would have a literal blade, but they would carve a spell on it to protect them from evil forces. So these are Thoth and Seshat at the Temple of Luxor, and there we can see that they both have the shenring and the Heket symbol there above it as well, but only carrying a single rod together, Upper and Lower Egypt. But as a comparison between the Heket symbol, sometimes it's a fully grown frog, sometimes she's represented as a human form, but also has this transformational between the tadpole and the frog. So there's a little bit more on Seshat. I'll be looking at the stretching the cord ceremony, astronomical connections, pyramid alignments, temple alignments in the future. But yeah, goddess of astronomy, math, geometry, weights and measures, science, knowledge in general. So with that, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. More to come.